and lock in the day and time, etc., by the end of this week and send it out to you to make sure. And so we'll try and get a time that suits you, basically. And because of everything being up completely disorganized and in flux, we've had to change it. So if anyone's nominated to do it in person, we're definitely going to do it online now. So some people nominated to do it in person, so that we won't be able to do that at this point. So just so we'll organize a time for you to do it online. All right, let's jump straight into it. Did you want to add anything, Julian, before we jump in, or should
Um,
I get in?
no, that was the main thing. I guess
Yeah,
we'll try and ensure that you get your first preference. If not, we'll get
yeah,
in contact with you, and you'll know
yeah,
your date and time by the end of the week.
yeah.
Um, yeah, let's jump into the detail of the oral. I
Okay.
guess that's what we're
Yep.
aiming
Here,
to gain.
here for. All right. The long and
So,
short is it's 16 minutes in length. You have 8 minutes to present your presentation, where you give an uninterrupted 8 minute presentation, and then at the end of that, there is an 8 minute question and answer session. It'll be a two-person panel, so it'll be Julian and myself. Uh, and the question and answer is really just the panel's opportunity to ask you to elaborate on some of the points and finer details of your research question. So the questions are there just to get it to make it clear. The goal of the questions that for this SAC, and it's the same for the oral at the end of the year. This is a test run, if you like, for the end of year oral, except of course at the end of the year you're presenting what you found out. Whereas in this one, you're still presenting, you're still talking in the future about your research. You're still talking from the perspective of not having completed your research. You're still talking about the proposal and the aims and hypotheses, etc. So you're talking in the future about what your research will be. At the end of the year, you're talking about what it was. Um, the goal of the questions are to try and help you bring uh, out everything you need to in order to tick off the rubric and get as many marks as possible. The
mm,
question and answer is not there to try and stump you or to trick you or to catch you up or look for an inconsistency. Uh, it's there to try and give you the opportunity to say everything you possibly can say about all the different elements of your research.
yeah,
Okay,
that's a
so
really good point. So sometimes we might even just ask, oh, can you mention this in your talk? Could you could you discuss or unpack that a little bit more? Or yeah, that was interesting. You made this connection between A and B. What was your thinking there? Or if we, sometimes students um, take a bit more time to get to what their research methods were. Sometimes they run out of time a little bit, and if that happens, that we would ask a question about that. So we would allow, we realize that maybe you didn't have all the time to talk as much as you wanted to about the research method, so we'd ask a question about that. So it's our aim is to help you achieve the best you can with the questions rather than to pull
yeah,
apart your research or to trip you up or anything like that.
yeah. So most of you will find that 8 minutes is not very long. So there might be some things that you want to save for the questions as well. So, but look, try and put as much detail as possible into the oral. But again, with all things, uh, don't overpack it, with just a wall of information so that your audience can't remember anything. Look, there's a balance with everything. So if you're anxious and feeling like you're not covering every single minute detail, um, don't be too worried because there's the question and answer. But the main thing you should be thinking about with the oral is what is your argument that you're presenting and what are the elements or steps that you need to make in presenting that. Okay, so um, just that point down the bottom, this is not a TED talk or a debating competition. You're not here to win a prize. You're not here to impress the audience. You don't need pyrotechnics. You don't need dancers. You're here to present the arguments and the evidence and the facts to put forward the best possible argument. Uh, so that's all you need to worry about. So you don't need to impress the audience with your sweet rhetorical skills. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, so I know some people do debating. That's a different kettle of fish altogether. All right, let us proceed. All right, in a nutshell, what are you wanting to do here? What are you wanting to get across? In broad brushstrokes, you want to be able to explain what the problem is you're seeking to address. What's the research about, and why is it important? Why is it important that we deal with it? Okay, so that's that. Remember, often I've mentioned, Julian and I have talked about, you want to show the importance and the significance of your research. Importance means why this question is important for us to consider as a society or as human beings or whatever it might be. And significance is, why is your research significant in relation to what is already known by the experts? What is it that you're doing that's building on the expert literature? Okay, so importance, significance, and that comes out in you explaining and clarifying the research problem you're wanting to address and the research question that's going to guide your focus.
Yeah. This aspect of people's research is probably been honed a lot. But since SAC 2, some people have made some significant adjustments or changes, and we'd like to see that in this SAC as well. So, um, uh, you know, feel full confidence to be able to fine tune those aspects of the importance and significance of your research. Maybe you've uncovered a bit more in the expert literature, so you're starting to bring that
Yeah,
in this SAC as well. So although it's been something that's been in the background, you've done a number of times throughout the term, is the kind of final articulation of that.
yeah. Annabelle, did you have a question?
Yeah, just do you think you could say in short, it's sort of like the importance is what it means to like the world, the significance is like what it means to the literature?
Yeah, I think so. So in your case, it's important. The importance is that we want to improve the quality of life for Indigenous Australians.
Yeah.
And the on a number of metrics, there is inequities. This is not good. That to my mind sort of ticks that importance box. And then significance is, well, there's very limited understanding of why the Close the Gap initiative hasn't adequately addressed or brought that inequity or gotten rid of that inequity. And there's no research that really clarifies why this is the case. People saying it, but there's a gap in the literature, if you like. And so, yeah, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, absolutely spot on. And I think, yeah, I hope that, yeah.
Yeah, that clarified it. Thank you.
That was a good example of how to use, you know, talking about complex matters in their essence. And sometimes you might be doing that in your oral as well, trying to condense what it is that you're talking about in a digestible manner, or expanding as well. But that's a nice little example of things that you
Yeah.
could do in your oral presentation. In essence, this is this and this is that. You can do something like that.
And I just wanted to reiterate that point that Julian made too. That's a lovely one. That a lot of you have really evolved in your understanding of the complexity and nuances involved in your research question. So, and it's okay if you've changed your thinking and fine-tuned. It's really, really great if you have, and being able to sort of even acknowledge your evolution. So, if you feel that part of what I'm getting at here is this. In part of justifying your research question might be explaining your thought process or process that you've gotten to refining your question in a particular way. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you wanted to look at obesity in the Victorian context, and then you discovered that there's been a lot on obesity in the Victorian context across the whole, but there hasn't been enough research on obesity in particular areas in rural Victoria. And there's reason to think that certain communities have a very different cause. There's a very different set of causes for why obesity is occurring in, whatever, as opposed to across the Victorian state as a whole. And you want to look at that particular. And then you might have been that, in SAC 2, I was thinking that I wanted to look at the Victorian context, but I realized that it was more important to look at specific cohorts or specific regions where obesity was quite significant. And so I focused my research on that particular area because that's a real problem and we need to understand why. So can you see how even talking about the justifications for the steps that you've taken to refine and focus your research is a good way of justifying why you're doing what you're doing and what reasons you have to do what you're doing as well. I think the big one I just wanted to get across too is in this SAC, you're going to have to talk about your hypothesis a bit. So it's one thing to say that there's a bit of a problem and you've got a research question. You're going to have to tell us about what you think you're going to find out. What it is that you think is going to be the results. What are the results of your projected research? Because obviously, if you can't formulate or guess what your what you're going to find out, then why are you doing it in the first place? What is your hypothesis? Why do you? The hypothesis would feed into how you're designing or going about carrying out your research. So if you think you're going to find out, for instance, obesity in Bendigo. Sorry, people from Bendigo, just picking it at random. And if you're designing your research in such a way that you're looking for particular things, then you have to explain why it is that you think that those particular things are going to be there. And that would feed into why it is that you're designing your research in a particular way. The other point I just wanted to make, that hypothesis doesn't, that's typically part of the scientific method, and not everyone is using a standard scientific method. But for this SAC, you still need to talk a little bit or give an indication of what you think you're going to find out. Okay, and I'll talk about that a little later when we look at the rubric. But I just wanted to flag that with you, and so you have that in your mind. What could you say about what you think you're going to find out in this SAC? All right. The other point that I wanted to just remind you of, you don't need to overwhelm your audience with facts and details and data. You only use information as it's pertinent to get you to the point that you're trying to make. So try and think conceptually, if you like. Don't be too heavy-handed and just 30% of this people and 1 in 5 people, and overwhelm your audience with information to make it look like you've done lots of reading. Only use that insofar as it gets you to be able to justify a point. How is that being used as a premise in an argument that you're trying to make in the broader justification of your research? There's that one. And the last point, sorry, conceptual design. I think I've mentioned this in the past. I won't sort of go on about it too much. What is the design of your investigation? What is the idea, if you like, or the structure of your research, and how does that work? Don't talk about the steps when I ask you imagine you're doing a survey on whatever it is, and I ask you, what's your conceptual design? And your answer is, well, I'm going to do a survey. Well, the survey is the thing that you're going to do to gather data, but that's not your conceptual design. Your conceptual design is that in the survey, you're going to look at the difference between people aged 16 and people aged 17 and see if there's a difference in how they understand and use social media. And then I'm going to compare those two cohorts and see if there's a difference or not. And that will be able to tell me data. Okay, that's the conceptual design, the way in which you're going to take the data and use it to then be able to get to answer the question that you're asking. Yeah. So I hope that sort of reminds you of that. What's your conceptual design? What is it that you're going to try and find out? And what is how are you going to use the data or the evidence you're going to find to be able to get to that finding that you're wanting to get to. I'm going to do a survey, or I'm going to interview people, is not a conceptual design. That's that's sort of your method, if you like, that, or the thing you're going to use to gather data. So I hope that sort of triggers you to think a little more about your research and how you can present it in the best light. Next, okay, exhaustion. Sorry, I had that in there. I know that everyone's probably listening to being drone on. I'll pause here for a second. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm feeling like a deflated balloon. Did anyone want to sort of clarify anything that we've said so far? I'm going a bit quickly. And
I think there's one question there. Should we be dropping quite a few names of authors, or is it the same, or is that the same as heaps of stats? I think that there would be a few key pieces of literature that you've come across that you'll have time to talk about in your oral presentation. That might relate to background studies, or it might even relate to the way that you've designed your selected methods. So I think that that's important, and you can introduce and use those authors' names and the year of publication. Don't feel like you have to overwhelm your memory with all of these different studies and authors and literature, but have a couple up your sleeve. Three or four significant ones that you've found that have, your Rosetta Stones, as we like to call them.
Could I just, one of the things that we've experienced, sometimes students think, and this is not students' fault, because sometimes it's a feature of the particular discipline that people work in. So I'm thinking that behavioral science, or psychology is like this, that when you read psychology papers in journals, there's a style in that in their journals where they often name check all the time. And you can even read sentences in psychology where it'll say, according to Jones, 1917, Powell's 2014 was right. But then Jones 2021 has shown, just as Lowndes 2016, that Powell's 2019 may actually be right. So it's sort of like all of these names, and I, as a person who is not a psychologist, I'm not familiar with any of those papers, and I have no idea what's just been said. And so for the purpose of this paper, you can sort of name check or sort of acknowledge that you've gotten a particular piece of data or a particular argument or evidence from a particular place, but it's important that you explain it so that your audience knows what the hell you're saying and how it fits in with the point you're trying to make. So it's about doing it in the right way, and being able to explain what someone.
I've spent my morning. We have all these audio recordings from previous years, and I've spent a couple of mornings a couple of hours this morning just listening back through and hearing previous years of students do their oral, and there's no detraction from a student to say, look, I can't remember in the question discussion, I can't remember exactly what the study was, but it found out this and explained this. That's absolutely okay. The student didn't remember the name or the year of publication, but they were able to use the understanding and the content from what they'd read to apply it in their response, and that's absolutely okay. Again, we're not trying to trip you up.
No. So it's about what the article has said and how it relates, and being able to explain it and how it fits in with what you're trying to make the point. So getting that balance right, it's a bit tricky sometimes. All right. I think I've clicked the next page. All right, this strangely hasn't resized. I'm not sure why. I'll send a link to the rubric separately, but just wanted to. Sorry, it hasn't. Yeah. Oh, damn it. So 3 elements just here on the left-hand side. We've got the exposition of the research question and explanation of its significance. So this is really asking you to explain what it is that you're doing and how it fits in with what the experts already know about it. What's the point of difference, and what's the reason you have for going in the path that you have in relation to what other experts have said? That's really what that first one is asking you about. Just sticking with the left-hand side, the second section, assessment criteria, general one, is explanation and justification of research methods. Why is it that you're going about answering your question in the particular way that you have chosen, and what is it that makes you think that that's going to get to the finding, that get you the evidence and data you need to be able to answer the question? And then the last one is the responses to questions and challenges. And that basically, that criteria 3 is from the Q&A session at the end. So let's click through and we'll just talk about each of these. So the exposition of the research question and explanation of its significance. I've hammered home that point about significance. What is novel about your research in relation to the expert literature? That's the first criterion there, the first dot point. Insightful initial predictions about research outcomes and or potential problems or issues. So what is it that you think you're going to discover? What reasons do you have for thinking that you're going to discover that? What evidence is there in the literature? Even though there's a gap in the literature based on the way in which you've understood the problem, what is it that you think you're going to find out? Could it be, for instance, that once we've understood or done some research into self-determination, we discover that even though the Australian government has said that there is lots of opportunities for Indigenous people to self-determine, when we understand the theoretical model of what self-determination is, when we look at a number of success stories across the world and how that's been implemented, we discovered that they haven't done that at all. And that's what they need to really address. And here are the things that they need to do in order to ensure that Indigenous peoples can self-determine in a way that will achieve the outcomes that Close the Gap hasn't been able to achieve. That would be a way of potentially doing that. So what do you think you're going to find out and why? Yeah. Insightful. Oh, the other point, sorry, there's a section issue. So it's got that insightful initial predictions about research outcomes and or potential problems or issues. So that potential problems or issues means what are the considerations there that you need to consider in designing the direction of your research and how you're going to go about doing it. So it might be that, as I said, not everyone's using a scientific method. It might not be possible for you to have a nice clear-cut hypothesis, but you can talk about what issues or potential problems you have taken into account in order to do a literature review or whatever it might be. What is it? What are the things that consider? What are the arguments that you have in order to justify your approach? Yeah. The third criterion for this section: insightful and effective accommodation of an educated non-specialist audience. All right. This sort of goes back to that point I made about when people just name check, particularly in psychology. So it might be that you've got a lot of knowledge and you know what Jones 2014 and Kaplan 2021 have said, and it's in your mind, but your audience, they're educated, they're not fools, they have reasonable general knowledge, but they're not an expert and they haven't read the articles and then are not familiar with the technical language that you're using, and you're going to have to make sure that you're bringing them along with you. Do not assume, so you will be presenting to Julian and myself on the panel, but do not make the mistake of assuming that we know stuff. Pretend that you have never met us before, and that you're going to have to introduce everything to us point blank. So it might be that, you know, Julian or I might be unwell on one day and we have to get a substitution of another teacher. And so don't anticipate that you're going to have an audience who kind of knows a little bit about what you're talking about. Don't fall into that trap at all. You want to use this as a nice test run for the end of the year where the panel will have no idea about your research. Yeah. So when you're introducing a technical concept, you know, you might be using a word that is often used in everyday language. So like, for instance, again, because we've been talking about it, it's in my mind, self-determination. So we talk about self-determination in an average everyday sense. If I was to say to you on the street and use that word, you would know what I mean. But I don't know what that means in the context of the research on Indigenous communities. And it's got a very, very specific definition that's used by experts in a particular way. And it's been refined and defined. And you need to make sure that when you're using key technical terminology, your audience knows precisely what it means. So you want to be able to do that. Obviously, you've got a time frame and you can't do it for anything, so you're going to have to pick and choose. What are the key concepts you need to make sure that your audience is understanding and is clear on? So non-specialist audience, they're not an idiot, so you don't have to explain you know, every single word or define dictionary terms, because assume the person knows what all the words mean in a dictionary. It's what within the expert literature, how these terms are refined and defined in a very, very specific and sharp sense. Julian, have I missed anything here? Do you think?
No, that's pretty comprehensive. I guess with that last point, maybe utilizing examples or analogies if the terminology is complex. If you're having to explain that to a non-educated specialist audience, they have a degree of intelligence. So making it palpable or to their understanding, you can do that through just a little nice example is sometimes useful, just to allow them to think through the concept, or an analogy. It's kind of like this, or it's kind of like that. We kind of did that before again with Annabelle's example. This is, so in essence, this is what significance and importance is. That was a strategy to use to try to explain a complex concept. So you might think about examples or analogies that you could thread throughout your discussion at important times where the concepts start to get quite technical and the terminology used needs to be unpacked in some way. So you can utilize that.
Yeah, in the course, I think in the lead up to week 16, there are a few activities that you're invited to do, thinking about maybe using a metaphor and or constructing an analogy to make something clear to your audience. So if you've got some really technical language or technical concepts, Hamzi, I'm thinking of you here and thinking about how sometimes I know I have to, you know, sometimes when I sort of get bombarded with technical language, it takes me some time to sort of hold it together in my mind. And so a metaphor or an analogy or an example would really come in handy for you. It gives you an opportunity to reinforce a point for your audience. It gives your audience a couple of seconds to process and understand the complex things that you're talking about. So they've got that in their head so before you go on to the next step. And then you can always come back to that to help clarify it. So yeah, that's a really great point. All right. Critical and insightful explanation of key aspects of the selected research methods. So this is where that conceptual design business comes in. I'm going to do a survey. I'm going to read the literature. That's what you're going to do. But we want to know why it is or how it is that you're going to gather the data in a way that will allow you to answer the question. So, you know, if I want to compare two gene editing technologies, you wouldn't be saying, I'm going to read the literature and compare and come up with an answer. You would be wanting to say, if we can show that Cas9 gene editing techniques has a greater ability to edit 3 or 4 sections of DNA strands at once with minimal error rate, then we could say that even though Cas3 has the ability to edit a much higher number of genes on the chain at a time, the error rate's much too high, and that is why Cas9 is the superior gene editing technology. And given the number of research to date, a number of data sets have shown that Cas9 is consistently has a lower error margin, we can conclude that Cas9 is the superior gene editing technology. So using that criteria, yeah, yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, I hope that gives you a sense of what we mean by that. Not just going to do a survey. It's what is it? What sorts of data and what sort of things you're looking for? What sort of differences or connections are you trying to find? And how is it that you're going to construct that little cage or that strategy, if you like? So I think in the course we talk about the difference between strategy, thinking about chess as an analogy or a metaphor. Your conceptual design is your strategy, but your method is sort of like, which pieces are you going to move? I'm going to move my pawn, now my horse or rook or whatever it might be. Can you tell how it is that you're going to move those pieces in order to achieve that victory? And I think I've got a little example in there. Yeah, so that's an example of a sort of research design statement. Whoops, sorry. That might help you. I'll make the PowerPoint available later. I don't want to bombard you, but there's a little example that might help. Third point, second one in this section, insightful justification of suitability and feasibility of selected research methods, including ethical considerations. And there should be in brackets if you have any that need to be really addressed. So why is it that you've chosen this particular approach as opposed to any other? You've chosen to do ethnographic research, going into a school and interviewing students, principals, teachers, parents. Why didn't you just do a survey and just look at the difference where you gave the same survey to parents, teachers, and principals and look at the differences in the responses and sort of section them in that way? Wouldn't that have given you the same kind of data you're looking for? Oh, no, you're doing an ethnographic study because you want to actually get from these cohorts their sort of criteria for how to assess the school. Okay, so that's why you're doing that. You're wanting to get ideas through a sort of semi-structured interviews about why they think the school is failing and what criteria could then be used to then structure how we're analysing this particular school. So because if you were to use a survey, you would be using your pre-constructed ideas or criteria, and it wouldn't actually be allowing new information or new ideas to be coming to the fore. Oh, okay. So that's why you're choosing that particular approach to gathering data. Why are you doing a literature review? Okay, because in the past 5 years, there has been a number of new studies, and there hasn't been a meta study to look at all of the new information that's been coming through. And someone needs, the last time this was done is 2015, and there've been 40 new articles in the past 6 years, and it's time to replicate that study by looking at all the new studies that come in. And that might give, and it seems to be that there's new information that might contradict or go against what was previously known. Okay, that's why you're doing this. Good. Sorry, Julian, are you trying to? I thought I could hear someone wanting to jump in.
No, that's some good examples there that give a good sense of suitability and feasibility of selected research methods. We want to know
Yeah.
why, broadly speaking, why are you choosing to design your research in this way? What's the overarching aims and purposes? How are these approaches and methods selected going to ensure that you're able to develop the appropriate evidence and understanding that'll help you to respond to your question.
Yeah. So there's that feasibility question, yeah, and I suppose that links to scope. So if your research is on why is it that 80% of Victorians are overweight, and you're going to do a survey of every single Victorian in the state, that's not feasible. So how is it that you're going to scope your project in a way that you'll still be able to get the kind of data you need to be able to talk about Victorians across the board? So we will inevitably, one of the questions that will be asked is about the scope of your study. Oh, so why are you looking at Victorian concept? Or why are you looking at Eastern Europe? Why not all of Europe? What about England as well? Are you including England in your? So why did you exclude England in that period? Oh, and why the 16th century? These are the sorts of questions that will sort of be asked. Why is it that you're focusing here and not there or there? And why did you cut this out and include that? What's your reason? So that's a nice little sort of indication of the kind of questions that we might ask. Ethics. Some of you will have a lot to say about the ethics. This year we've got a few people who are doing research for which there are a lot of ethical considerations, but a lot of you don't really have much in the way of ethical considerations to talk about. Most of you, if you're doing a literature review, you've got think about ethics in terms of you as a researcher working in an industry where you want to attribute, etc. You don't have to go on about it. Long story short, if you don't really have much in the way of ethical considerations, then save that time to talk about other things. That's what my advice would be. Julian, do you think I'm sort of
Yeah,
saying?
definitely. Often those research projects have a lot to talk about with regards to conceptual and theoretical understandings, and it takes a bit of time to work through that. So you could kind of use your time wisely, redirect your energies to that section, maybe.
Yeah, and look, if you don't ask or say enough about ethical considerations, you've decided, well, look, I'm doing a literature review, and I don't really have much to say, so I'm just going to focus on trying to explain my methodological approach and my design. Then the Q&A section, if we want more information, we can ask it. But for those of you who, you might be doing a survey, you might be looking at something where there might be some ethical considerations, you want to be able to demonstrate how it is and how that's affected the implementation of your study. Why is it that you're asking certain questions? You're again administering a survey in a particular way to safeguard the well-being of your participants in your study. All right, responses. Responses to questions and challenges. So I'll just read these, and I think they're self-explanatory, and we'll talk about this. And people often have a few questions about the Q&A session, so ask away. Responses are cogent and specific to the posed questions and challenges. So what that really is saying is, if we ask a question, do you answer it? And give a reason to say why. So sometimes people panic a bit and they might get stressed out, and we ask a question about, so why did you scope that study in that particular way? Why did you choose the Dutch Republic in the 17th century, and why did you exclude the sort of German provinces at the time? And then you start to just talk about how really cool Germany was at that period, and you're not answering the question, why did you exclude or scope it in a particular way? So some people tend to be quite passionate and excited about their topic, and you guys are feeling it now. You know so much about it, and you could talk endlessly about the really interesting things that you've discovered. So the question sometimes people fall into the trap of talking about something they're really interested in, but they're not answering the question. So Are you listening to the question that's being asked, and are you really getting to it? Big thing, please write this down if you can't remember this. We're in the imagine we're in SAC 2. You've just given your spiel, you're out of breath, and then Julian says, "Look, do you mind if I ask you a question?" You go, "Yes," and your brain's still whirring, and all of a sudden you notice that no one's talking in the room, and you're staring at Julian and myself, and we're just looking at you silently, and you realize that we've asked you something, and you have no idea what we've said. You just ask us to ask the question again, okay? It's okay to acknowledge that you're not clear on what the question is. Ask us to rephrase or re-ask the question, and that will help you sort of get a hold on what we're getting at and go from there. So don't panic, please. It really isn't something that you need to stress about. You're the expert. You're the person who knows everything there is to know in the room about this topic. We know less than what you know. It's about trying to explain to us what you know and address our sort of questions because we're not clear and knowledgeable on the topic as you are. If you're not sure or not sure that so let's say we've asked you a question and then all of a sudden you notice that you've been talking for 5 minutes and you're not sure why you're talking, just stop and say, look, I'm not sure if I'm going or if I've answered your question. Does that answer your question? Okay. And that if you haven't answered the question, then we can ask the question again, or we might say, you've answered the question perfectly. We've got another question. The other point I wanted to just bring up quickly is the more questions for you, the better. The more questions that we can ask you, the better it will be for you. Don't think that we ask one question and then you've got to talk for 8 minutes, because we want to target our questions and try and bring out the best in you and see if we can get you to articulate relations between things. And so try and make your answers as short and succinct as possible. Obviously, not a yes and no. You want to be able to answer things as detailed as possible and give the reasons and justifications, but just be wary not to overtalk. Sometimes people get nervous or anxious and they just get verbal diarrhea. I am someone who suffers from that horrific disability, and often it's because you're stressed and worried. Just if you notice yourself doing that, just press the stop button and just ask, I'm not sure what I'm saying. Have I answered the question? Have I gotten to what you're wanting me to tell you? Okay, so that's just a little tip there. Now, I think, Luella, you asked a question. Yeah, absolutely. If you get overwhelmed, you don't have to talk non-stop, and you can bring in water and all that sort of stuff. That's
Annabelle,
fine. Yeah.
will we be given points to cover like the templates for other SACs? So I think at this stage, what you could do, there's a couple of approaches. You could use the rubrics as a bit of a dot point, or a checklist. That's one approach. The other approach is to work through the two main sections. This is the third section, responses to questions and challenges. And then start to see how perhaps in your writing you reconfigure in different ways. So where you want to include this or that, where you want to make your predictions on your studies, where that comes in. That's kind of up to you a little bit.
Yeah, there are some guides in the course that you could use as a model. I'll find that after I just finish this PowerPoint. So I think it's weeks 14 and 15. There's some content in there that might be useful to go through, and there is a couple of things that you could use as a structure, a checklist, if you like, of things you might want to include.
Yeah.
Again, we find I find that when we give people a template, people tend to follow it to the letter, and they they sometimes just think, well, I filled in the template, I'm done, and they're not really thinking about what they should be including or not including. And so sometimes the templates, I find, can actually limit people more than anything. So that's why we haven't sort of said, right, in the first sentence, you must say, hi, welcome, my name is blah, blah, blah. And today I'll be talking about fill in the gap. I find that doesn't work. Everyone's got a particular style that works for them, and a way of bringing out the argument and the evidence in a way that works for them. So that's why we don't do that. But there are in the course some rough schema, if you like, for how you might structure it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, will you still be able to see the PowerPoint?
What PowerPoint?
Wait, you had a PowerPoint up before?
This one?
I can't. Is it just me? I can't see it. I just see your face.
Oh, well, I'm sharing it. Can everyone else see the PowerPoint?
Maybe it's just me.
All right, everyone, yeah. It might have been you've clicked on change view. You know what it is? You've got hosting rights, Annabelle, so it might be that there are a few extra buttons there and you've pressed one.
I've been overwhelmed by the buttons.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So, yeah. So there were
just to clarify the other one. So Jessica, is the draft due at the time of our oral? No is the answer to that. The 2,000 word draft, the end of the term. If you want to hand it in at the oral time, that's okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I guess, to come back to, we mentioned this at the start, but I know that some people have joined us. So, so half of it is you presenting your oral. That's 8 minutes, and then another 8 minutes is allowed for, is it 8? So 16 minutes all up, roughly.
Yep.
8 minutes for question and answer. We'll probably give a little tap if you start to get towards 8 minutes and we feel like you're, got a little bit to go to, just to give you a bit of forewarning. Maybe like there's 30, maybe it's 7 minutes and 30 seconds. We'll just give a little bit of a warning just to allow you to wrap things up. At that stage, if you're in that situation, just kind of play it calmly and just remember that you have a lot of time, that 8 minutes, to further unpack what it is that you wanted to say in the question and answer. So that's something to be mindful of, I suppose.
Yeah. Sometimes people, do a jam-packed 8 minutes, and when they practice at home and they're talking at light warp speed, they can get through it. And then in the real world, they discover that they get through 3/4. And then you get to the 8-minute mark, and we sort of indicate that you've gotten to the 8-minute mark, and you wrap it up, and then you're still going strong at the 30 seconds later. What we will do is we will say, all right, look, we're just going to wrap it up there. You'll have to stop doing your presentation because we need to ask you questions so you can get the marks for the question and answer session. But inevitably, the markers are there to help you, so they will ask you a question that will allow you to end or try and say what it is that you wanted to say. So if you find out that you're just getting, halfway through and the time is up, don't panic. The questions will allow you to try and get everything that you need to say across. You can have so just quickly too. Everyone will be presenting online. Some of you have opted to do it in person, but because of the world and the uncertainty, we'll just do it online. So you'll be able to use cue cards. So what's your question? Are you talking, Jessica, about the 2,000 word essay? That's just an email. Yeah. Don't worry about your supervisors. That's just an email straight to us. Also, I'd ask that you share it and put it in the online blog as well. But ideally, yeah, if you email it to us, that'd be great. Sorry, I lost my train there. Yeah, so you'll have the chance in the question and answer to jam in anything that you want. You are allowed to use cue cards. If Some people even prefer to read off a page for the answer. Yeah, sorry, for their presentation. That's allowed. Whether or not that leads you to present as the best possible presentation, that's up to you to decide. Some people like to memorize their presentation and go from there. It's up to you. Whatever works for you is perfectly fine.
Yeah,
But I would say that, yeah, sorry, you go, Julian.
yeah. So just to get I guess the next week, between here and next week, or whenever you're going to present your oral, you're starting to plan ahead to see how you're going to chunk this out for you. I'm going to put some examples from previous years just in the resource area. I don't put them up as a particular great perfect example of meeting all the criteria, but you might get a sense of um, how you might imagine the scenario to play out, I suppose, and that might help you to think about how you're going to structure this. And the other thing to mention, I'm not sure if you're available, Will, but Wednesday and Thursday afternoon, we'll open up this online area. If you wanted to do a little mock presentation of your own, it's hard to do that at this stage, but maybe you just wanted to run through a couple of minutes of how you might start it and how you might talk about things, and we could even offer some possible mock questions back to you if you wanted to come
Yep.
along. We're opening up from 3 till 4. I imagine that might run out till a little bit after 4. So if you're able to jump in, just jump in. Don't have to plan anything ahead.
Yep. Yeah. Please, everyone is welcome to do a practice oral beforehand and get some advice on how you can improve it and refine it. So not everyone sort of has the time or wants to do that, and that's fine. It's up to you. But definitely get in touch if you'd like to do a practice run and drop into those sessions. Yeah, and what I try to do is I'll use the rubric to give you some ideas of what you could do to improve that. Look, just quickly, we're getting towards the end. I just wanted to just bring up the last point here on the PowerPoint. So the two criteria for the question and answer. We talked about the first one, responses are cogent and specific. But the second one there, responses draw on a range of relevant and highly effective evidence from the investigation. So this is where we're wanting you to probably show that you've not just read prior research and that you can tell us about things that have been said in that research or that you're using data but you're actually taking that information and doing something with it as opposed to just reporting it. Okay. So sometimes we find that students will talk about, an article they've read and say, oh, well, look, I read this article and it said that 30% of people over the age of 65 actually really like chocolate ice cream. And then we'll say, oh, okay, great. So how does that connect with your research wanting to look at how ice cream is made? So that's making that link and that sort of synthesizing, bringing things together and connecting it. So that's one of the things that the question and answer section is looking at. How strong are the connections between the research and your ideas and thinking and the evidence, and how you're bringing it all together to create a cohesive sort of investigation. So that's the other thing. So I don't think that it's just about you being able to drop names or drop data and that you've got to, the website that you've got it from or the paper or the journal. It's about how you're using that to fit into your argument. Okay. How are we going for time? Look, I did have a couple of examples, and Julian, sorry, I didn't get a chance to put in a sound bite. Do you want to play maybe a
Sure,
sound bite
sure,
of the
sure.
question, maybe a question and answer section? Do you think you've got time to maybe get one of those up?
I don't think we have many questions. I've got some just straight out because it was from one year where we have all the start of them.
Okay. Bum, 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 bum,
I'll
bum.
definitely put it up in the online area. There's a temptation because they're quite long. There's a temptation that you can't really. Depends how much time people have available at the moment to
Yeah.
listen in. Because it'll take about at least 10 minutes just to get, because you have to get your head around a bit of someone's research field when they're explaining concepts and things like that. But
Yeah.
I think it might be best to put them up as an example for students to look at.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. We'll leave it there. The other thing we had, just to remind you, everyone has got the critical thinking practice run coming up in a couple of weeks. So this is where it gets a bit confusing. Some of you will be doing the practice run at your school. Some of you will be coming into VSV in Thornbury to do the practice run. Just want to make sure that you've all got your head around where you have to be. The critical thinking practice run is last year's test. You get to come in, you get to use the computer, you get to work out how the buttons work and all the rest of it. And it just gets you into the zone, gives you a sense of how the questions work, what they're asking, and how you go about answering it. You don't need to prepare or be ready for it. What I like is people to go in and just have a go and get a sense of what the questions are asking. Then the answers, Vika then send us your answers, and then we're going to have a look at your answers, and then you get a chance to see how you're responding to the questions and seeing how you can fine tune them to improve how you would do it in the real test, which will be at the end of, I think, end of July is when the formal test is slated. And in the lead up to that, we're going to have a number of opportunities to practice and prepare for the critical thinking test.
Yeah.
And
So
it's
the take-home message there is not, in the grand scheme of things, don't have it at the forefront of your mind during this busy time, the next week or two. You'll sit it, it'll be about an hour. It's a trial as much for the technical admin people at your school as it is for yourself as well, for them to get everything right. But the benefit that you get from approaching it and doing the best to the best ability that you have is that you'll get a bit more support and feedback on your responses. So that the way that you've engaged with the critical thinking in a particular question. I think Will's going to look at some examples here to get you thinking ahead about this and the type of questions that will be asked. As you'll see, they're fairly general questions that are aiming for you to demonstrate your critical thinking, but also some of them to demonstrate your knowledge of research as well. So some questions will be about, like this one, below are 5 possible research questions. Which research questions would be the most manageable in practice? Now, some questions would lend themselves a little bit more than others, but it's a fairly open-ended question, so it's the way that you justify how the research question that you select is more manageable and elaborate on that. There's enough information there to unpack within a paragraph or two to justify your response. What would people select there?
So look, let's I was going to suggest I don't know if people their brains are if your brain is in the zone here, but maybe we'll just give you a couple of minutes. So we'll still, if you've got any questions about the oral here that we haven't covered, let us know. Throw it in the chat. I'm sure there's things that we've sort of missed, but yeah, let's have a go now. Sorry, I'll just put this back onto slideshow so we can see it. I just realized that it's there we go. So this is just one of the questions that you'll be asked. Just have a go now, and then we'll have a look at a sample example of what a high response looks like. And if you want to share in the chat box, that'd be great. It'd be nice to see, and everyone can compare how they might answer this question. You're really asking, yeah, I'll just stop talking, just have a go, and then we'll have a look at what a model answer would look like. And then once we've done that, I think we will all can go and have a break. So Jessica, yeah, for the 2000 word essay, yes, Friday the 25th. That's fine. Friday the 25th of June.
Another way to flip this question would be to which one would be the least manageable as well as you're scanning your eyes through this. Are there any compounding variables associated that would make something less manageable with these research questions? Are there practicalities of access to information that would make something manageable or not manageable?
Is the scope too broad, maybe?
Yeah, when I look at D, what's the best way? That seems quite broad for parents to limit the time spent.
Is
Best,
it going to, yeah, sorry, you
best in
go.
terms of what?
Yeah, it's going to be easy to measure. I mean, how do you measure something like best? What does best mean when talking about limiting? You know, okay. Oh, that's a good one, Luella. So you're thinking that um, not a longitudinal study. So are you assuming that this is a question that would be done within the context of the subject?
Yeah, like I feel like a lot of the other ones, like the environmental impacts of since the 1920s and the limiting time spent by the children and any of that, they'd take a while to gather that data. But
Yeah,
E wouldn't really.
you've done something interesting there, Luella. You've sort of assumed that this question is asking for EI and being able to get done within the year. Is that what you're thinking?
Oh yeah, I did not.
Yeah.
Was not it?
Um. Yeah.
I think that's a bit of a grey area, actually, myself.
I agree. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the wrong thing to assume.
No,
You can make
no,
it
no, no.
transparent if you really want to be sure. You could say, assuming that the study was conducted in a year-length EI project, what was it? This
Yeah,
was,
this question is designed. The best way to answer this question is a
yeah,
longitudinal study. However,
yep.
this question,
You couldn't possibly
even the
complete a longitudinal study in a year-length study of extended investigation, so therefore
yeah,
it would be less manageable.
yeah. So I think that's a reasonable thing. Just make it clear that that's your argument. Yeah, just make it. Yeah, state that assumption is what I want to get across. Yeah,
Just to add to the analysis of the question,
yeah,
in terms of what is the most manageable, I guess you would say, well, E, because you literally just look at the results and one has better results, but that's not a very interesting study or a very interesting result because okay, well, it's that one. But in comparison, like I would say A with that question of why is more broad and you'd get a more interesting result that's worth researching.
yeah. So you're thinking about which is the best research question from the perspective of the criteria of significance, I suppose.
Yeah, but I guess that's why I went back to the questions like, well, most manageable.
Yeah.
Yeah, easiest, I guess.
Yep. So first point, yeah, if the question's looking at most manageable, and then you say, well, all of these questions, A is the best because it's asking a more rich and interesting question. You're right, but you're not answering that question. So do be specific to what they're asking. But you might be able to say that. You say, look, I think that the anti-bullying one is the most manageable because it's very easy to think of a design that could be done that will evaluate 2 programs over a period of whatever. And it'd be very easy to develop criteria to assess them. However, there'd be issues. But even though it's probably more manageable, whether or not it's a significant question is open to question. So I think the more the merrier. That would be a really relevant point to add in there, but don't just make sure that you're directly answering that question. Yeah.
Does anyone want to raise any considerations that they see with E as not so manageable? Is there anything about E? Because I'm just playing the devil's advocate, I guess, a bit here. Is there anything um, that's that could lead to some hesitation there?
I guess in D, the use of the term screens is really broad. Like there's screens like iPads, iPhones, but also like computers at school. Like screens is a massive part of life, I guess. Whereas if they just made that children looking at their phone, that's a bit different.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
ambiguities with wording can be useful to
Yeah.
talk about here. Yeah.
So an argument, in effect, you're sort of saying this question is not very manageable because of the way in which they're defining screens. Had they have said iPads or phones or TV, this question would have been far more manageable because they could have locked those and excluded these other forms of screens.
Yeah.
But in terms of being able to monitor how many screens an average child is looking at during the day, it's impossible for a researcher to be able to sit there next to the participant and be able to monitor that. And yeah, so that's a great argument. Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to critique it. I was just going to pick on you, Jessica. Sorry, just quickly.
I was going to say with Jessica's one, usually this comes in the context of the 7th question is which is the least manageable as well. So you might have two questions there. Sometimes people try to explain the the challenges of all the other different ones in order to justify the selection of their chosen most manageable one, and that's going to take a lot to do sometimes as well.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Jesse, that I think that you'd need to provide more detail. I understand that in the context of, doing this in the chat at the end of the day, but yeah, you would want to explain why we think it is the most specific and why we would think it's measurable. So yeah, you want to be sort of providing a reason for each of those if you're putting them in. Don't just use the language or the descriptors. You've got to try and give a reason as to why you think that might be
Yeah,
the case or not.
there's a clarification. I can see why people choose E because there's a clarification of what the measurement might look like, the effectiveness in reducing the incidences of bullying. We know what we're looking for, the incidences of bullying in that situation. So there's a
Yeah.
sense of what it is that we're trying to find out
Yeah.
to make those comparisons.
Yeah. It's such an strange question because in a sense what we're doing is you're imagining a research project, you're imagining a design for how you might do that. And when you read E, I could imagine taking two anti-bullying programs in looking at two different anti-bullying programs in two schools that are very similar and then comparing using a range of measures that I could use, like a value, how many incidences of bullying or how many kids were suspended from bullying in a year, and then that you could get sort of quantitative data or as one of the measures for the success of the program potentially. So in a sense, you're being asked to imagine how you might carry out this research question and whether or not that imagined research investigation that you're is manageable or not. So it's a bit strange because it's asking you to imagine something and then evaluate it in terms of whether it's manageable or not. Let's have a look at an example question response. So this is what a response. So this is what a high level response would look like. So I'll just give you I won't read it out. I'm just going to read it myself, give you a chance to have a look at it. And which one is C? Sorry, I'll just toggle back. C, this response says, environmental impacts have resulted from the introduction in the 1920s of a non-native frog species to the banks of a small lake in central Victoria. So this is the most manageable. Let's have a look.
Yeah, I have a bit of some difficulties with this one. The thing I see about it, I find it very difficult to manage. One thing would be that you would have to assume that records exist prior to 1920s and following 1920s that are available in public records for this small lake in Victoria somewhere. My hunch is that there wouldn't be records available for that. So it would be difficult to separate other variables that might have had an impact at the same time. Maybe there was a population growth in the 1920s in the area. Maybe there was some land clearing. So my speculation is that it would be quite difficult to find useful records from that time. That's my main challenge to this one.
Yeah. No, I agree.
But
Um,
as you can see, there's scope to argue the case in various ways, which is not to say that there's no correct answer, but the way that you go about justifying and the way that you're in the limited amount of time that you have available, 10 minutes or so to develop a response.
Yep.
Um,
just having a look at this question. So I agree with Julian. I completely disagree with it. I think that I don't think they've chosen the one that is the most manageable, but the argument, the way in which they've answered this question is really great. So they've said, they've given a reason for why they think it's the most measurable. They've also then given a reason why it's well scoped. So they said, well, it's a very specific period, time frame, and very, specific geographical location. That makes it very clearly scoped, and that will allow it to, be answered in a clear and precise manner. And also the fact that that time period is about to the introduction of the non-native frog species. It'll give them a clear qualitative difference between the before and after, and allow an easy comparison of data from those two periods if they exist. So can you see how they're not just so for each of those elements that I think, like what's the scope, how, what sort of measure would be used and how clear will it be? Are there variables, could there be hidden variables that might interfere with the objectivity of the results? So you can see that there's a little bit of a checklist, and we talked about this earlier on in the year when we did the critical thinking seminar on the Saturday, and we will be revisiting that again. So there is a bit of a formula that you can use to answer this kind of question, and I feel that a lot of you were doing that here, which is quite pleasing. It's not just about saying, well, it had a scope, it's measurable, etc. You got to say why or how. Yeah. All right.
I have
Yeah.
one question just about that. So
Yep.
in terms of that, is there a way that B could also get 3 marks if you justified it well enough? Or A or whatever?
Absolutely. So you mean B, this one?
Yeah, so it's not like it's multiple choice, the answer is C. It's more about your explanation and the way
Oh,
you
yeah,
said
no correct
Yeah.
answer. Yeah. So I imagine that all of us would disagree with the actual answer there in terms of, we could easily, and as Julian was saying, it's clearly problematic, the answer, but the way in which they've justified it in terms of and demonstrated their understanding of the elements of research and spoke to each of those points made it a high response.